Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to have our special guest on the show today, and I'm going to introduce to you Sonia Shand. Sonia completed her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and is a licensed professional counselor in Chicago. She currently works with a group practice and administers therapies to clients who present various different issues, including, but not limited to, autism spectrum disorder, depressive disorders, general anxiety disorders, social anxiety, self-esteem, obsessive compulsive disorders, and personality disorders. Sonia utilizes a variety of theories and techniques when it comes to client treatment, such as CBT, DBT, and psychodynamic theories. Sonia is currently a board member of Autism Speaks to Young Professionals. She is a professional speaker and spoke at the National Autism Society Conference in 2015. She also spoke at Autism Speaks Recognition Night in Chicago in 2019, and recently was filmed from a media company in Chicago in a segment about autism. She is an upcoming and an aspiring author to a memoir about growing up with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder herself, and it is currently under editing. She runs marathons for Team Up with Autism Speaks and has completed 4 Chicago marathons and 1 New York marathon with Team Up. Please welcome to the show, Sonia Shand. Thank you so much for being here, Sonia.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I know. I'm so excited. And I also forgot to mention for our listeners today too, you also have a podcast, correct?
Yes, it's called On the Spectrum with Sonia. And
Okay.
actually, I ran 3 New York City marathons with
Oh
Autism
my
Speaks
gosh.
and 9 Chicago marathons with Autism Speaks.
Oh
This will
my
be my
goodness.
14th marathon this
Oh my
October
gosh.
and November. 14th and 15th, Chicago, New York are my 14th and 15th marathons.
Okay, well, I'll cheer you on the side, and I can be like your little pace car, but I'll just cheer you from the sidelines. Kudos to you. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I just no, I dedicate I always believed in giving back, so the memoir that I have right now that is being edited it's with the publishers at the moment, and we're doing our second rounds of edits together. And I've always believed in giving back, so I dedicate it to people like you, people like other parents of individuals who've been touched by autism, families, individuals themselves who've been touched with autism. I've always believed, even when I run, and you will be getting a mile run in your honor, by the way, for Chicago and New York.
That's
Because
so
anybody
awesome.
who,
Thank you.
oh, no worries, because I dedicate all these miles to people, families on the autism spectrum, individuals on the autism spectrum, people who've been touched in any way, shape, or form. I myself am on the spectrum, so I've always believed I want to give back and share, because I really feel like our voices need to be amplified. And I feel like, as much as everyone talks about community this, community that, I saw this meme the other day on social media, and it really strung at my heart. It goes, everyone talks about this idea of community takes a village to live your life, community to raise a child, right? But
Right.
then the thing is, somebody then put, this is the community when you have a kid with autism, and it was like radio silence with only trees and no
Right.
people.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that breaks my heart, because even though I'm not, I'm a single woman, no kids, not married, none of that, but I can empathize, because I'm on the
Yeah.
autism spectrum, and I know what we go through being on the spectrum, trying to get community to understand us.
Right. And I think that that's always been my biggest concern for my son is I always wonder how isolating it feels for him. I always worry about, it's one of my worries as a mom, is how
Sure.
isolating could this be for him? And I know, so tell us a little bit about what led you to going into therapies. I know, we're kind of leading into that conversation right now. And for those of you listening in, Sonia and I have spoken before, and I think your story is just extraordinary because you were diagnosed later in life, correct?
Yes, I was diagnosed when I was 20 years old.
Okay.
I was a sophomore in college at that time. So this was back in 2002.
Okay.
And I grew up undiagnosed. And a lot of what led me to become a therapist, well, first and foremost, I got pushed into a profession I did not want to be in. My parents pushed me into going into the legal field. I did go to law school. I did
Wow.
do an LLM in financial services, and I moved out to New York City from 2011 to 2016. And don't get me wrong, I was excited about the first job I got on Wall Street. I was very excited about it. That feeling I will always remember because I was like, oh my God, I'm getting a really, really big girl job. But truth of the matter is, I've always wanted to, I was always better equipped. I always had that personality to help others.
Right.
And the thing is, for me, um, growing up, I grew up very misunderstood. I grew up very bullied. I rarely had any friends. My family also didn't really quite understand what was going on with me. I was always seen as the problem child because I was acting out. And the acting out, primarily, I mean, it started first in fifth grade where we were on a field trip, and at this point, I've been trying to make friends. I've been losing friends. I used to cry all the time at school. I was a very hypersensitive child, and I went through a lot of bullying, teasing, taunting at school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at a point, so our class had to go on a field trip to a camp, and it was like an overnight field trip. And the whole point of that field trip is to learn about how pilgrims lived. Okay.
Okay.
And people were going out so we had to do these camp skits over the campfire at night. Everybody
Yeah.
had to perform. It was one of the assignments. And after all the skits were finished, the principal and some teachers did their own kind of comic parody skit together, and it was so fun to watch. But the principal said, "Okay, for those who want to go back to the cabin, you guys could, but here's another option. We have another activity that everybody can participate in. Is we're going to go for a walk around the camp preserve." Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, well, the majority of the class went for the walk because it was something to do. Nobody really felt like going back to the cabins at that time anyway. And so it was dark out at that time. So they had the people with the torches, the camp workers with the
Right.
torches out and flashlights, and people walked in their group of friends. It was to a point at that time when people really didn't want me around. People had already been starting to show signs to me, like people whom I thought were friends at one point, they
Right.
stopped being my friend. And when I would try to approach them, they'd walk one way fast enough, and then they'd turn directions when they saw that I was following. And they did this for a while until I finally got the hint and just got dropped.
Right.
And so at that point, people were with their friends, and I was walking alone, and I was walking behind a guy that I was crushing on at the time. And so I was really frustrated. And I was like, I hate myself. And the guy turned around. He goes, "Hey, Sonia, do you want to kill yourself?" I said, "Yeah." And I didn't really think too much about it. So I was like, I want to kill myself because that's how much I hate myself. Okay.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then
Yeah.
I remember I looked up at the sky. It was full moon, stars. And of course, I got screamed at by other girls. They're like, "Sonia, can you just stop it now? Stop it." Right. But I looked up at the sky afterwards, and I was still kind of, nobody really said anything more to me that night. I saw the stars and the sky. It was just a very illuminated sky, full,
Right.
beautiful moon. Just, I was like, you know what? I could live up there. That's what I started thinking at that time. I was like, I didn't really think anything. I didn't know much about death and, afterlife or reincarnation or anything like that. All I knew is
Right.
when people die, you go to the sky. And so I was like, I could live up there. And so that image really stuck in my head, for
Yeah.
years to
And
come.
how old again
And
were you, Sonia?
I was only 11. I was fifth
Oh
grade
my
at that time. I was
gosh.
finishing fifth grade. I was going to go into sixth. And um, in sixth grade, then, I couldn't fit in. It was so people from my elementary school fed into that school, but then also there were two other elementary schools in the town that would
Okay.
feed in. And and then of course, you'd have those people who would move in, some from the parochial school that would come over. So I was excited, to start sixth grade because I was like, okay, this is my chance. I could show all those people whom I went to elementary school with that they were wrong about me and that I was worthy of being around and I was fun to be around.
Right.
What ended up happening is the I I wasn't making friends. If
Right.
anything, I used to try to win over friends by throwing birthday parties, starting in
And
elementary
doing
and
things.
going into middle. and none of it worked. And I tried one more time, and then there was a day when I was bored. So, in sixth grade, it's probably most familiar with most schools. You'd have different teachers for different subjects. You'd have passing periods. You have to go to your locker,
Right.
get your stuff, go to your next class. So reading and English was always the same teacher for sixth grade. Okay. And so I was in the classroom. It was between passing periods, and I was bored, and I started making up a cheer about that same guy that I had a crush on from elementary. And I was just bored, and I made it up, and people were laughing, and I'm like, okay. Um, I was, I thought, oh, this is so cool. I'm finally getting attention. And then the next day, I forgot about it. I went outside after I ate lunch to just get some air. And then one girl came up to me and she goes, "Hey, Sonia, do that thing you were doing, that cheer." And I was like, "What cheer?" And then the one where she was like starting to show the arm movements. And then next thing I knew, it became like a repertoire at school. And I would get a whole crowd of people around to watch and laugh. But people to watch and laugh. And then I didn't realize that people were laughing at me. They were not laughing with me,
With you. Yeah.
And I noticed that people were laughing, and I thought it was a little weird. I'm like, what's so funny about this? Because I didn't see the humor in it, but
Right.
I didn't realize that. And I tried asking people why they were laughing, and some only told me it was because other people were laughing. Nobody ever really gave me a straight answer. No. And so what happened is the I went to a football game because we got asked to be color guard. The class for band. I was in the band in sixth grade. I played the flute. They gave us an opportunity to perform a color guard routine at the halftime show for the high school football team. And I went and I performed the routine, and my mom was there, and she was, so this was back in 1994, so you had those old school camcorder cameras.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Back in the day.
back in the day. Oh, my mom, I've even seen her with bigger ones. I thought like she was like next level, like Hollywood film movie with some of the cameras that she had. Oh my God. And because she used to video everything, okay? She was always the photographer, the videographer, you name it, she was doing it. And so I was doing the routine, and I got out, and I was standing by the bleachers, and a group of guys from my grade came up to me, and they go, "Hey, Sonia, do your cheer, do it now." And then like in unison, like a mantra, they kept saying, "Do it, do it, do it, do it." And so what happened is my mom heard them, that she was putting away her camera, and she came over and she's like, "Hey, leave her alone." And they all scattered, and she's like, "Sonia, what does this do it now?" And I was like, "Oh, nothing." And she knew better than to believe me.
Right.
So the principal let him know, the assistant principal, and the assistant principal says, "Okay, we'll try to find out who did it, but you have to realize your daughter likes to do this kind of stuff for people." And of course, my mom wasn't happy, nor did she approve of his message. And teachers started to intervene then at that time, and I started getting in trouble. Then I realized nobody really wanted to be my friend. That was my last ditch effort, because all the attempts thus far had led me nowhere. And so I started getting very depressed, started talking about suicide, made up fake attempts that I've done. Then there was one day when my mom was talking to the school counselor. I was actually in the parking lot. Her car was parked out, and I was like, "Mom," she gave me the keys. She goes, "Hey, Sonia, go sit in the car, wait for me." I took the keys, I went in the car, and then I was really car illiterate, so I decided to put the car in reverse because I thought maybe that was a radio, whatever. And it rolled back into the bushes of the school, okay? But then I went and told people the next day that it was a suicide attempt, and that I put the car in reverse and jumped out, all right? And at that point, and then there was another, then the next day, so it was like 3 days. The first one was I tried telling people that I told people that I tried jumping out a window as a way to kill myself. Second day was that putting the car in reverse into the bushes. Third day was that I told them I was going to go on my bike and ride into the middle of the busy street. And then I got asked to take a leave of absence. I was out for 2 weeks. They wanted to hospitalize. So the psychiatrist I started seeing in fifth grade, because they were giving me Ritalin. Even though, I mean, even though I still was on the autism spectrum, they thought, my problem was ADHD, and it's a very common misdiagnosis for girls.
Right. I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yes, it was a very common misdiagnosis for girls.
Yeah.
What happened is, it, a, I, they said, okay, Sonia has to go to the hospital. There's no other way. Then my parents remember they had a colleague whom they've referred patients to for depression and all. And so they actually contacted that colleague, and he agreed to see me outside in an outpatient setting. He agreed not to throw me in a psych ward.
Hospitalize
Okay.
you. Right.
Yeah, he didn't want to do that. So I still remember this. He had the most
Yeah.
calmest voice I ever heard. So I went back to his office. I remember, well, when I got there, I remember the secretary's like, "Oh yeah, you got to fill out the paperwork," and I was like, "What?" And my mom's like, "Don't worry, I'll fill it up." And I just remember this very vividly. So his office was right across the street from the main hospital campus. It was in an oncology building, and he had an office on the third floor of that building. And
Okay.
I remember walking in, I remember going to the back, and I remember him asking in the most calm voice, "Sonia, why do you want to kill yourself?" And it was just, and all I could think about is Jacob didn't like me. But that was my answer. We'll just call him Jacob, this guy. Jacob didn't like me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but truth of the matter is there was so much to unpack in that.
So much
And
more. Yeah. And
it
at
was
that
so,
age, you can't articulate. I mean, at that age, it's such a hard age to articulate what you're thinking, what you're feeling, because you're going through, so much at that age. So, I
yes,
mean,
a lot of teacher
yeah.
abuse had happened at that time. A lot of teacher abuse had happened. A lot of bullying had happened,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not know how to articulate it. You're right. And he didn't, and the thing is, he stayed on to be my therapist, but he didn't really do much therapy. It was more like scolding me eventually. But what had happened is when I went back to school after the 2 week leave of absence, um, they they started having meetings with my parents. The school decided to start having a meeting with my parents because they thought I was not their school material, basically. So they
Yeah.
wanted to send me to another school. They wanted me to
Mm-hmm.
go out. And to say my mom was livid about it
Yeah.
would be an understatement. To say my parents were livid, disappointed, hurt, oh my gosh, everything packaged into one
Right.
bow that was messy and not
Mm-hmm.
pretty would be how I would describe it.
Yeah. And just another layer that you as a child had to witness because, you're already going through this turbulent time. I'm sure you knew something was wrong, but you weren't exactly sure what. And, we look to our adults, right, to help us and to seek guidance. And it's like you weren't getting any of that support. And then to see that on top of it, it's just another layer of chaos that you have to try to process at that age.
Absolutely. It was another layer of chaos. And it was just, and in order for me, they eventually came to an agreement, and because the psychiatrist had to go and advocate on my behalf in the second school meeting. The first school meeting was that they were just telling my parents about how horrible I was and how much of a problem child I
Mm-hmm.
was. And they just wanted me out of there. And my dad basically beseeched the school to let me stay for one more week. They reluctantly agreed, and they said, okay, we'll give one more week, but then we really kind of want her out. We'll have another meeting, but I think she needs to go. Then there was a second meeting, and lo and behold, they wanted to kick me out again. The psychiatrist came and advocated on my behalf, and they switched up. Started giving me lithium at that point. I had to start taking lithium. And so the provisions were, okay, I had to be on that medicine. He said, before we make any drastic changes to Sonia's routines or anything, let's just see how this medication works. And, and let's see how I started seeing, and he's like, well, I started to see that, let's just start to see how things progress because
Right.
she is going to be under care here
Mm-hmm.
with outpatient treatment, intense outpatient therapy. which meant basically going and seeing him maybe like every week or something.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
which is not intensive outpatient.
That's
And
not
even when
intensive. It's like, yeah,
no, it
that's
was
not
not.
intensive.
That's not intensive at all. That is a complete antithetical notion to
Right.
intensive outpatient treatment. Intensive outpatient treatment means you're going to a day program. And
Right.
actually, I should have been in one, to be honest. An intensive outpatient treatment while I was on the 2-week leave of absence. I probably
Right.
should have been in a program instead of just being at home. I know my mom took me shopping one day to just, distract me from everything. I went to a museum of science and industry one day, which is my favorite museum to this day. I could spend a whole day there and never get bored. I could stay there. I could even sleep there if I wanted to, right? So, I mean,
Right.
I mean, but I mean, that's the thing. And so it was, it, but I mean, it ended up being like, even when I was seeing the therapist after, I was getting chastised. But here's the thing: in order for me to stay at that school, I had to be escorted from class to class. I was not allowed to eat at cafeteria, not allowed to be alone during passing periods. I had to be in the resource room. I was either escorted from the paraprofessionals or the special ed teacher herself. I had to leave 5 minutes after the bell rang to go to my locker to get my stuff to go to my next class. 5 minutes before the bell rang, I'd be picked up from class and escorted out. So everybody used to see me being escorted from place to place. I was
Oh
basically
my gosh.
treated like a prisoner. It was like basically seeing you get like handcuffed and
Hmm.
by police and in shackles.
Yeah.
That's
So
basically what it felt like,
let's
when
just
I
remove you completely from any social interaction whatsoever is what it sounded like. Yeah.
yes,
And I can
yes.
identify with that watching my son. We had a similar the school that he's no longer attending, we put him in a different school, but that was happening, the exact same thing. They would take him out of the line. He would have to go sit by himself and wait in the library. He was escorted to the front of the front office instead of standing in line with his peers to be picked up after school, and just simple stuff like that. And it's just, so heartbreaking. And I remember having a complete fit, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. Like, what's the big deal if he doesn't stand in line? And I'm like, because you're removing him from just pure modeling, social interaction, and watching others interact to try to see those behaviors or to see how they're interacting, and you're depriving him of that social interaction. And if he's not standing in the line for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at the end of the day, and that's 20 minutes a day, why don't you add up the minutes and see? And instead you're alienating him. So now the isolation just creates more, and I remember being so worried about him because he doesn't speak very often, my son. And when he does, it's usually in broken sentences. So how does he know how to advocate for himself? He doesn't,
No,
so
and it must be.
yeah. And it's heartbreaking to hear that you also endured something similar as well, Sonia, because I don't think that people realize that at the core of you, you're still a human being. At the core of you still need love and kindness. And I just don't understand. And what kills me is that people do this, in my opinion, off of their necessity and what works best for them. And
Yes,
I literally
absolutely.
had the principal of that school tell me that. Well, it works better with the para's schedule because she's got to clock out straight out. So that's why we're bringing him to the front. That's why we make
Which
him
is
sit in the library.
completely preposterous and
Yeah.
unfair. It is completely preposterous and unfair because you know what? Your son is a human being. Your son needs love, kindness, care, compassion, just like any other human being out there. And this is,
Right.
the issue that people on the spectrum face is that people don't look at them as
They
equal
don't.
to. They look at them as less thans. They look at them as that like something is completely devoid. They're like completely devoid of anything,
Of
right? Like
anything. Right.
and it's just so it's heartbreaking. And when you were telling me that story,
Hmm.
I literally went through a visual flashback, and I
Yeah.
was like, I
Yeah.
can see what he was going through. I like can picture it
Right.
very, very clear in
Right.
my
And
head.
hearing you say this right now, it makes me wonder how many other kids have had this type of experience and have not been able to voice or advocate because they don't know. I mean, I didn't know at that age, even autism or not, you're still learning how to voice your emotions, voice how you feel. I came from a home, you respect your elders, you do as you're told, that kind of thing. So when you feel like you can't speak upon what's bothering you, I mean, how do you know? I mean, it's just, and I think I hear your story and I wonder how many other people has this happened to, where they haven't felt like they have enough voice, and that one outside person hasn't looked at them and said, maybe we should have a different approach. Maybe we shouldn't be escorting them and, leaving them in the library. Maybe we shouldn't be, maybe we shouldn't take them out of the line. Maybe they should be allowed to walk in line with their peers,
Right. And made an example of every day.
Right. And I'm sure that you felt that way too, looking back, And so when you fast forward, so you said you got diagnosed at the age of 20, is that correct?
Yes, I got diagnosed at the age of 20, and I'll just say, the rest of my school experiences was that,
Yeah.
Restrictions eventually got lifted, at some point. I was eventually, they started with allowing me to invite one person to come eat lunch with me a day, and then maybe giving me one free day at the cafeteria.
Wow.
But, and eventually
Wow.
it let up. But honestly, all those people that even the girls that used to come, they used to be so mean outside of being in the resource room, and nobody would pay attention to me anyway. I was only inviting girls that I thought were still giving me attention, but they didn't ever like me, and other kids visibly showed that they were like, oh, get away from us,
Right.
And I was so stereotyped. So honestly, I went through school friendless, lonely. I graduated with no friends, basically. I did do other things. I had good grades. I was able, I was very academically oriented. So I was able to get good grades, but I also knew, as any person who grows up, that grows up in a very adverse environment, knows that education is your way out, right?
Right.
For a better for yourself. And even though my parents, I didn't grow up in, that kind of an environment that you would hear about, that, where people were like, oh my God, I have to get to school to get out of this environment. I didn't grow up in that kind of environment. I grew up in a rather good neighborhood, but still it was a bad environment for me.
Right.
I could still feel,
wasn't the right one for you. Yeah.
And I also grew up with a culture where they believed in conformity, right? So, my parents are from India. I'm a first generation American, and I think it's also very instilled from British rule. And thanks to them, a special thanks to them for that.
Special shout out.
Special shout out. After all, August 15th was India's Independence Day. So
There we go.
Shout out to the British, to thank them for that idea that we all have to conform and we all had to live up to standards, and teaching that and instilling that, and it's very prevalent. You can see the after effects of that, and within that community, the community too. I was also shunned from the Indian community as well. So on the one hand, I was going to school, I was getting shunned there. My parents would make me go to these Indian events, and that lasted all the way up till I graduated. I was sitting alone on the floor, sitting alone at tables, being left alone. And the thing is, honestly, because they had a reputation and an image to hold, I was not able, I was not able to even fend for myself, and I felt like absolute trash.
Right.
And honestly, that love-hate relationship that people talk about, right? You know what? I learned how to hate myself at a young age then too,
Yeah.
Everybody else hated me, so I ganged up on myself as well.
Right. Well, I think over time, that's when you become exposed repeatedly to those types of experiences. It's only natural to develop that thought process. I feel like, I've spoken over the years to so many parents and kids, and, that after a while, it's even with parents, their fears, their stigmas that they have, it all translates in sometimes with what they're doing for their kids, and so the shame component, right, is really strong for, especially, I think sometimes it makes me worry for my son, because I don't want him to feel like he's not valued or he's not appreciated or he's not loved But at the same time, I do worry about him entering depression. I do worry about him forming anxiety because he feels that, or he knows he's not as socially accepted, you know. And it still is, and I, you know, like you said, people preach about community all the time, and I do too. I always say it takes a village, but I'm very selective about the people that I let in around him because I want to make sure that it's a positive influence for him. And not like a regulation thing. Let's put you, you know, let's regulate you this way. Let's escort you here. Let's do this. Like, I don't want that to be that way for him. Structure is one thing, but, you know, this is something different entirely, you know. So what kind of sparked you to get, so later on in life, you're in college. So tell me what it was that sparked you to get diagnosed, you know, finally. I mean, was it just that you felt like you had the freedom to be out in college and you could learn more about yourself independently and you didn't feel that you had that parental restriction, so to speak, or school restriction, or what was it that made you finally go to seek a diagnosis?
So during the summer of 2002, so what happened is when I graduated in 2001 from high school, to 2001 to 2002 year, I went to a local branch for the first year of college, and then I transferred to the main campus, which was like an hour and a half away from where I was living at the time. And during the summer of 2002, people were giving me feedback on behaviors I was doing, which weren't aligning up to what was age appropriate. So, like,
Okay.
I, you know, was acting really excited. I developed a crush on a guy that I met who was working at the desk in, we'll call it Chancellor Hall. And I got excited and told everybody about it. And people are like, Sonia, that's how young teenagers act, right? Or certain things
Yeah.
that I was, you know, repetitive patterns of speech and things like that. People were calling out what I was doing. And I was, you know, and at that point I was like, you know what,
Something's
this is
going
not
on.
good.
Yeah.
Yes. I started getting, well, I'll tell you this, if we rewind a little bit. So junior year, I started seeing a therapist who kept urging me by the time I finished my first year of college, please go get psychologically tested. There's something going on with you that's not, I think there's more to the story here.
Right.
And I think she knew that it was autism, but she didn't say anything just because she wanted to get it confirmed first. But what ended up happening is by the time I got the test done, I was getting ready to leave for the college at that time, for the summer school. And she had left because she got a job at a university in Chicago. And so she had left where I was seeing her. And so when the test results came, the doctor said, you know, there's an issue on how you don't see things the way other people do. This needs further examination.
Okay.
And, you know, things may point to like either a nonverbal learning disability that needs further clarification. This is why you need to go see the neuropsych who could evaluate further. And then when we went to the neuropsych at that time, after, you know, summer school had finished in 2002, she was like, you know what, from hearing your history, you know, with the sensitive hearing, all the bullying, teacher abuse, the acting out behaviors, certain rigidities that you've had, and your difficulty really connecting with others and, you know, behaving, you know, in ways that are not considered mature, right?
Right.
We are, this sounds like autism. Well, it was formerly known as Asperger's back then.
Right.
Now it's autism spectrum. And it was a relief to get that diagnosis. I tell you, it was like, finally, it gave context. I was not just some depressed, anxious kid, you know, that everybody kept labeling. Oh, you know, and this is the thing with women on the spectrum, right? They're very, very often misdiagnosed with either being just shy or anxious or depressed or something, right?
Wow.
But nobody ever thinks to dig further and figure out, okay, what's your social life like? What was your relationships life? What were your relationships like? Do you have any sensory issues? Do you have any, like, what's it like when you connect with others? Have you ever had a boyfriend before? I mean, like, or a significant other or a partner? Like, I mean, nobody
All those
thinks to ask
questions.
those things.
Yeah.
And I go there with my clients, and this is one thing I've been doing is I'd always like to ask, what's school like for you? What was school like? What was your relationships like with others?
Right.
What home like? And things like that. And I feel like, I, and when I look back at even my early life, I barely had any friends, and even certain friends, like, because my parents would have a family friend come and babysit. I'd go
Mm-hmm.
there, parents are working, and they had a daughter that was a little older than me, but she was already like, she used to say stuff like, Sonia, you should know how to do this by your age. Certain things you should have known how to do,
Right.
and from a social standpoint, and to
So then,
me,
yeah.
just, when I look back, it's like, a lot of things are missed.
Yeah. Right. And I'm sure it was a relief to have an answer, to not feel like, okay, I'm not completely, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't articulate what it was, and to have that answer, it's very, very refreshing, I'm sure.
It is very refreshing. And you know what? My mom always knew all along, because my mom is a physician, and she always knew all along that I was on the spectrum, but even she had problems getting doctors to listen to her, and
Right.
being heard. So I think, and this is, I was born in 82. Okay. So you're talking about the era of the 80s here.
Yeah.
90s, you think about 80s, what movie came out in 1988 that everybody first got their taste of autism with? Rain Man,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Right.
even
Yeah.
then, that wasn't even an accurate representation of anybody who's on the autism spectrum.
Right.
I mean, it's not.
Yeah. And I mean, my
So,
son's 12 now, and he was diagnosed, in 2015. And, even then we were lucky that we found the resources that we did, and it was a different time, but we've still, even now, the things that you were describing, we've had to combat as well as a family now, even today. Like, some of those stigmas are still very much there. I was almost, I'm a big believer in education. I've got, went to college. I went to, got my bachelor's, went through master's, all that. I'm big believer in education. And I think what was heartbreaking for me was to see how unsupported my son has been up until recently, because, where he's at now, we've vetted very extensively, but I think that was what was the heartbreaking part for me, was to see him so unsupported, because he was different, because he wasn't fitting that mold. He wasn't, the boxes weren't being checked off, kind of thing. And I think that it really it's heartbreaking for me as a parent to see that, because I believe, you want to believe so much in education and the system, and, he's going to blossom, and he's going to learn so much, and he's going to make friends, and they're going to help support him, even though he does have autism. And none of that happened. None of it. And, today it is heartbreaking. And I feel very fortunate, because where he's at now is phenomenal. He is thriving. He has friends, he's doing those things. But I was glad that I wised up by the time he was in third grade that he couldn't stay where he was, and he's in seventh grade now. And I'm just hoping that eventually someday he will be capable to go to college and do those things. But I can't make that happen if I don't have the support system in place, So, well, I definitely, for those of you listening in, I want you to stay tuned for next week. We're going to finish up our conversation with Sonia Shand next week, for part 2. But this does conclude our episode for today. If you have questions, comments, or even a show topic that you would like to hear about, please feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Feel free to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you like what you're hearing, please spread the word to others to help them to spread inspiration and hope, and also maybe some guidance. And thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep working on your puzzle, and remember, it doesn't have to all be solved in a day. Take care.